The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte Rose Windsor sat quietly in her bedroom, staring at the acceptance letter in her hands. At 15 years old, she had always been different from what the world expected of a royal princess. While her brothers George and Louis seemed content with their predetermined paths, Charlotte had always felt a pull towards something else, something that made her heart race with excitement and purpose. The letter was from Oxford University's early admission program for exceptional students, not for royal studies or international relations, as everyone assumed she would pursue, but for veterinary medicine. Charlotte had secretly applied months ago, using her middle name Rose and her maternal grandmother's maiden name, Middleton, to avoid any royal influence on the decision. She wanted to earn this on her own merit, and now she had. Her governess, Miss Patricia, knocked softly on the door. Charlotte quickly folded the letter and slipped it under her pillow. She wasn't ready to share this news with anyone yet, especially not her parents, Prince William and Catherine. She knew they had specific expectations for her future, ones that involved royal duties, charitable patronages, and eventually marriage to someone deemed suitable by the family. During breakfast in the family's private dining room, Charlotte picked at her porridge while her father discussed the upcoming state visit from the Japanese emperor. Her mother, Catherine, noticed her distraction, but attributed it to typical teenage moodiness. George, now 17, was excitedly talking about his upcoming military training, while 8-year-old Louis was more interested in the marmalade than conversation. After breakfast, Charlotte excused herself and walked through the palace gardens, her favorite place to think. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet as she made her way to the small greenhouse where she often spent time with the palace gardener, Mr. Thompson, learning about plants and flowers. But today her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the summer she had spent at her great-aunt's countryside estate, where she had helped deliver a foal in the middle of the night. The veterinarian who assisted had been amazed by Charlotte's natural instincts and gentle touch with the animals. That night had changed everything for her. She realized that working with animals wasn't just a hobby or interest, it was her calling. Charlotte remembered the conversation she'd had with her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, just months before her passing. The Queen had told her that sometimes being royal meant making choices that others wouldn't understand, but that true service came from following one's heart while never forgetting one's duty. At the time, Charlotte hadn't fully understood what her grandmother meant, but now those words felt like guidance from beyond. The next few days passed in a blur of normal royal activities. Charlotte attended a charity gala with her mother, smiled for photographers, and made small talk with dignitaries. But inside, she felt like she was living someone else's life. Every formal event, every protocol lesson, every discussion about her future role in the monarchy felt increasingly suffocating. One evening, while her family was gathered in the drawing room, Charlotte's phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian from that summer at her great-aunt's estate. Charlotte excused herself and took the call in the corridor. Dr. Mitchell had exciting news. She had been following Charlotte's academic progress through mutual acquaintances and had an opportunity that might interest her. A wildlife conservation program in Kenya needed volunteers with both veterinary interest and the ability to bring international attention to conservation efforts. It was a 6-month commitment that would begin right after Charlotte's 16th birthday. Charlotte's heart raced as she listened. This could be the perfect opportunity to pursue her passion while still serving a greater purpose. But she knew it would mean delaying or possibly abandoning the traditional royal path her parents expected her to follow. That night, Charlotte lay in bed staring at the ceiling, clutching both the Oxford acceptance letter and the information about the Kenya program. She had always been taught that with privilege comes responsibility, but what if her responsibility wasn't what everyone else thought it should be? The next morning brought an unexpected turn of events. Catherine knocked on Charlotte's door with tears in her eyes. She had received a call from a children's hospital where Charlotte had been a patron since age 12, A young patient named Emma, whom Charlotte had befriended during several visits, was asking for her. Emma was losing her battle with leukemia and had specifically requested to see Princess Charlotte one last time. Charlotte didn't hesitate. She dressed quickly and accompanied her mother to the hospital. Seeing Emma, pale and weak, but still smiling at the sight of her royal friend, reminded Charlotte of why she had initially felt drawn to helping others. But it also reinforced her belief that she could do more good working hands-on, perhaps with animals who couldn't advocate for themselves, rather than making ceremonial visits. Emma took Charlotte's hand with surprising strength for someone so ill. She whispered that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, to help sick animals the way the doctors were trying to help her. Charlotte felt tears sting her eyes as she promised Emma that she would find a way to help animals in her memory. After leaving the hospital, Charlotte knew she couldn't keep her plans secret any longer. The weight of her decisions was affecting not just her, but potentially her entire family's future. That evening, she asked her parents if they could have a private conversation after dinner. William and Catherine settled into the comfortable chairs in William's study, expecting perhaps a discussion about Charlotte's upcoming birthday celebration or her concerns about increased public duties. They had no idea that their daughter was about to turn their world upside down. Charlotte took a deep breath and pulled out both the Oxford letter and the Kenya program information. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on her father's desk. The silence in the room was deafening as her parents read the documents, their expressions changing from confusion to shock to something that looked like a mixture of pride and panic. William was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. He asked Charlotte when she had applied to Oxford and why she hadn't discussed this with them first. Charlotte explained her reasoning, emphasizing that she wanted to prove herself on her own merit. She talked about her passion for veterinary medicine, her experience with the foal, and her conversation with Queen Elizabeth about following one's heart. Catherine's reaction was more emotional. She began to cry, not out of anger, but from a complex mix of emotions she couldn't quite process. Pride in her daughter's independence and achievements, fear about the implications for the royal family, and heartbreak at the realization that Charlotte might be choosing a path that would take her away from them and from her royal duties. Charlotte continued to explain her thoughts about the Kenya program, how it could combine her love for animals with meaningful service, and how it might actually enhance the royal family's conservation efforts. She spoke passionately about wanting to make a real difference in the world, not just cut ribbons and attend galas. William stood up and walked to the window, his back to his wife and daughter. He was thinking about his own youth, his struggles with royal expectations, and his desire to have had more choices in his own life. Part of him admired Charlotte's courage, but another part of him was terrified of the precedent this might set and the potential consequences for the monarchy. The conversation continued late into the night, with emotions running high on all sides. Charlotte's parents tried to explain the weight of royal responsibility, the importance of duty over personal desires, and the potential impact her choices could have on the institution of the monarchy itself. Charlotte listened respectfully, but stood firm in her convictions. As the evening drew to a close, no resolution had been reached. William and Catherine needed time to process this information and discuss it further between themselves. Charlotte was given time to consider the full implications of her choices, not just for herself, but for her family and the royal institution. The tension in the household was palpable over the next few days. George sensed something was wrong but couldn't get any information from his parents or Charlotte. Louis, in his childlike innocence, simply noticed that everyone seemed sadder than usual. The palace staff, trained to be observant but discreet, recognized the signs of a family crisis, but maintained their professional silence. Charlotte found herself caught between two worlds. The one she had always known, filled with privilege and predetermined expectations, and the one she dreamed of, where she could follow her passion and make a difference in her own way. She began to understand that her decision would not just change her own life, but would send ripples through the entire royal family and possibly the institution of the monarchy itself. 3 weeks had passed since Charlotte's revelation, and the atmosphere in Kensington Palace remained tense. William and Catherine had spent countless hours in private discussions, consulting with palace advisors, and even having discreet conversations with other members of the royal family. The weight of Charlotte's decision was affecting everyone, but none more so than Charlotte herself. During this time, Charlotte continued with her royal duties while battling an internal storm. She attended a school opening with her mother, where she watched Catherine effortlessly connect with the children and teachers. Charlotte admired her mother's grace and dedication, but she also noticed how Catherine's every word was carefully measured, every gesture calculated for maximum positive impact. It was a life of constant performance, and Charlotte wasn't sure she could sustain it for decades to come. One afternoon, Charlotte received an unexpected visitor. Princess Anne, her great-aunt, arrived at Kensington Palace asking to speak with Charlotte privately. Anne had always been Charlotte's favorite royal relative, known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duty and her dedication to her own passions, particularly equestrian sports. They walked through the palace gardens, the same paths where Charlotte had wrestled with her decision weeks earlier. Anne listened without judgment as Charlotte poured out her heart about her dreams, her fears, and her conflict between duty and personal fulfillment. Anne shared stories of her own youth, the pressure she had faced, and the compromises she had made. Anne told Charlotte about a conversation she once had with her mother, Queen Elizabeth, about the nature of royal service. The Queen had said that the monarchy's strength came not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from its ability to evolve and remain relevant to each generation. Anne suggested that perhaps Charlotte's path could be both revolutionary and deeply traditional, serving others in a way that was authentic to her generation. This conversation planted a seed of possibility in Charlotte's mind. What if she didn't have to choose between being royal and following her passion? What if she could forge a new kind of royal service that combined both? Meanwhile, William and Catherine were struggling with their own emotions and the advice they were receiving from various quarters. The Queen Consort, Camilla, had suggested that Charlotte be given time to pursue her interests while maintaining her royal status, pointing out that several European royals had successfully balanced professional careers with royal duties. However, senior palace advisors worried about the precedent this might set and the challenges of managing Charlotte's dual role. The situation became more complicated when word of Charlotte's plans somehow leaked to a tabloid newspaper. The headline read, "Princess Charlotte's Secret University Plans Shock Royal Family." While the story didn't have all the details, it had enough information to cause a media frenzy. Suddenly, Charlotte's private family decision became public speculation. The next few days were challenging for the entire family. Photographers camped outside Charlotte's school, hoping to capture her reaction to the media attention. Catherine found herself fielding questions about her daughter's future during what should have been routine royal engagements. William was forced to have emergency meetings with his press secretary to develop a communication strategy. Charlotte felt terrible about the media attention and the additional pressure it placed on her family. She began to question whether her dreams were worth all this turmoil. The night after the story broke, she found her mother crying quietly in her private sitting room. Catherine looked up as Charlotte entered, and for a moment, the carefully maintained barriers between parent and child, between royal and person, completely fell away. Catherine admitted to Charlotte that she had been struggling with her own feelings about Charlotte's choices. As a mother, she was proud of Charlotte's independence and passion. But as a member of the royal family, she was terrified of the implications. Charlotte sat beside her mother and took her hand. For the first time since this all began, she truly understood the burden her parents carried every day. Every decision they made affected not just their family, but an entire institution and the millions of people who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity. That weekend, the family retreated to their country home in Norfolk, hoping to find some peace away from the media attention and palace pressures. It was there that Charlotte had a breakthrough moment. While walking along the beach with her father, William opened up about his own struggles with royal expectations when he was younger. He told Charlotte about the times he had considered walking away from his royal duties entirely, the pressure he felt after his mother's death, and how he had ultimately found a way to serve that felt authentic to him. He explained that the key was finding ways to use his platform for causes he genuinely cared about, rather than simply going through the motions of royal duty. William surprised Charlotte by telling her that he and Catherine had been doing research into the Kenya Conservation Program and had discovered that it was indeed a legitimate and impressive initiative. He admitted that her passion for veterinary medicine and animal conservation could actually be a valuable addition to the royal family's charitable focus. But he also explained the practical realities they needed to consider. Security arrangements for a princess living and working in Kenya would be complex and expensive. The media attention could potentially interfere with the conservation work. And there were constitutional questions about a direct heir to the throne spending extended periods outside the United Kingdom. Charlotte listened carefully to her father's concerns, and for the first time, she began to think practically about how to make her dreams work within the constraints of her royal status. She realized that she had been thinking in terms of all or nothing, either full royal duty or complete independence, when perhaps there was a middle ground. That evening, the family had their most productive conversation yet. Charlotte proposed a compromise plan that she had been developing since her talk with Princess Anne. She would defer her Oxford acceptance for 1 year and spend that time developing a pilot program that combined royal duty with her conservation interests. Her plan involved working with established wildlife conservation organizations to develop a royal patronage focused specifically on veterinary care for endangered species. She would spend part of her gap year in Kenya, but with proper security arrangements and as an official representative of the royal family rather than just a volunteer. Charlotte had researched similar programs and found that several successful conservation initiatives had been started by young people who combined passion with platform. She argued that her royal status could actually be an asset rather than a hindrance, bringing international attention and funding to conservation efforts that desperately needed both. William and Catherine were intrigued by Charlotte's proposal, but they needed time to consider all the implications. They agreed to present the idea to senior palace advisors and constitutional experts to determine its feasibility. The next week brought a series of meetings that would determine Charlotte's future. Palace officials, constitutional lawyers, security experts, and even representatives from the Kenya Conservation Program were consulted. The discussions were complex, covering everything from insurance liability to diplomatic protocols. During this process, Charlotte demonstrated a maturity and determination that surprised many of the adults involved. She had prepared detailed proposals, researched precedents, and even reached out to conservation experts to validate her ideas. Her passion was evident, but so was her thoughtfulness about the responsibilities that came with her position. One particularly moving moment came when Emma, the young patient from the Children's Hospital, sent Charlotte a letter. Emma's condition had stabilized temporarily, and she had heard about the controversy surrounding Charlotte's plans through news coverage. In her letter, Emma wrote that she thought it was wonderful that Charlotte wanted to help animals, and that she hoped Charlotte would find a way to do what made her happy. Emma's letter reminded Charlotte of why she had started down this path in the first place. It wasn't about rebellion or rejecting her royal heritage. It was about finding a way to serve others in a manner that felt genuine and meaningful to her. As the meetings continued, a surprising consensus began to emerge. Many of the experts agreed that Charlotte's proposal, with proper modifications and safeguards, could actually be beneficial for both the conservation cause and the royal family's public image. The key was structuring it as an official royal initiative rather than a personal pursuit. The palace's press secretary noted that the royal family had been seeking ways to connect with younger generations and demonstrate relevance to contemporary issues. A princess dedicating herself to wildlife conservation and veterinary care could be exactly the kind of modern royal story that would resonate with people around the world. Security experts confirmed that while challenging, protecting Charlotte during conservation work was feasible with proper planning and cooperation from local authorities. Constitutional lawyers found no legal barriers to Charlotte's proposal, as long as she maintained her official royal status and duties. The most significant hurdle came from traditionalists within the palace establishment who worried about setting a precedent that could encourage other young royals to abandon conventional paths. However, even they had to acknowledge that the monarchy's survival had always depended on its ability to adapt to changing times. As the week of meetings drew to a close, William and Catherine found themselves cautiously optimistic about Charlotte's proposal. But they knew that the final decision would need to be approved by King Charles himself, and that conversation would be the most important one yet. Charlotte spent the days leading up to the meeting with her grandfather, preparing her presentation and thinking about all the arguments she might face. She knew that this conversation would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially the direction of her entire life. The pressure was enormous, but so was her determination to find a way forward that honored both her royal heritage and her personal dreams. The meeting with King Charles was scheduled for a quiet Sunday afternoon at Windsor Castle. Charlotte had barely slept the night before, running through her presentation in her mind and anticipating every possible objection her grandfather might raise. William and Catherine would be present, but Charlotte knew that ultimately this decision would rest with the king. As they drove through the gates of Windsor Castle, Charlotte felt the weight of centuries of royal tradition surrounding her. This was where so many important decisions about the monarchy had been made, where her great-grandmother had lived and worked for most of her reign. Charlotte wondered what Queen Elizabeth would have thought about her granddaughter's unconventional plans. King Charles greeted them in his private study, a room filled with books about environmental conservation, organic farming, and sustainable development. Charlotte found some comfort in being surrounded by evidence of her grandfather's own passionate commitment to causes that had once been considered unconventional for a royal. Charles began the conversation by acknowledging the media attention Charlotte's situation had generated and expressing his understanding of the pressure she must be feeling. He told her that he had faced similar criticism decades earlier when he began speaking publicly about environmental issues and organic farming, topics that were dismissed by many at the time as eccentric royal hobbies. Charlotte presented her proposal with confidence, outlining her vision for a new kind of royal patronage that combined hands-on conservation work with the traditional royal role of bringing attention to important causes. She spoke about the declining populations of endangered species, the critical need for veterinary care in wildlife conservation, and how her generation viewed environmental protection as the defining issue of their time. Charles listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the practical aspects of Charlotte's plan. He was particularly interested in how she envisioned balancing her conservation work with her royal duties, and how she planned to use her platform to educate others about conservation issues. What surprised Charlotte most was how seriously her grandfather took her proposal. Rather than dismissing her ideas as youthful idealism, he engaged with them as legitimate policy suggestions. He shared his own experiences of using his royal platform to promote environmental causes and the resistance he had faced from traditional royal advisors. Charles revealed that he had been quietly following Charlotte's academic progress and had been impressed by her dedication to her studies, particularly in the sciences. He admitted that he had hoped one of his grandchildren would develop an interest in environmental issues, carrying on his own legacy of conservation advocacy. However, Charles also explained the very real challenges Charlotte would face. The role of a working royal was demanding and inflexible in many ways. Royal duties couldn't be postponed or canceled for personal pursuits, no matter how noble. The public expected royals to be available for their ceremonial and charitable obligations, and disappointing those expectations could damage the monarchy's reputation. Charlotte acknowledged these concerns, but argued that her generation's approach to service might need to look different from previous generations. She pointed out that many successful conservation programs were led by young people who brought energy, innovation, and fresh perspectives to traditional problems. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, covering everything from security arrangements to constitutional precedents. Charles consulted with his private secretary and legal advisors who had been preparing for this discussion all week. Gradually, the outlines of a possible compromise began to emerge. Charles proposed a trial period of 1 year during which Charlotte would defer her Oxford acceptance and work on developing her conservation initiative under the official auspices of the royal family. She would spend 6 months training with veterinary and conservation experts in the UK, followed by a carefully managed 3-month placement with the Kenya program, and then 3 months evaluating and developing long-term plans. The key conditions were that Charlotte would maintain her royal duties during the UK-based portions of the program, that all her conservation work would be conducted as an official royal representative, and that she would agree to regular evaluations of the program's effectiveness and her own development. If the trial year proved successful, Charlotte would be allowed to pursue a modified university program that combined her veterinary studies with her royal duties, potentially becoming the royal family's official conservation advocate. If the trial revealed insurmountable challenges, Charlotte would agree to follow a more traditional royal path. Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as she listened to her grandfather's proposal. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was far more than she had dared to expect just a few weeks earlier. Most importantly, it offered a genuine opportunity to prove that her vision could work within the framework of royal service. William and Catherine exchanged glances as their daughter considered the king's offer. They had come to this meeting prepared to support whatever decision was made, but they were relieved to see a path forward that honored both Charlotte's dreams and their family's responsibilities. Charlotte accepted her grandfather's proposal with gratitude and determination. She understood that she was being given an extraordinary opportunity, but also an enormous responsibility. The success or failure of her trial year would not only determine her own future, but could influence how the royal family approached similar situations with future generations. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation and planning. Charlotte worked with conservation experts to develop a comprehensive training program. She studied with veterinary schools, visited wildlife rehabilitation centers, and learned from experienced conservationists about the realities of field work. The media attention was intense but generally positive. The public seemed charmed by the idea of a teenage princess dedicating herself to saving endangered animals. International conservation organizations reached out to offer support and collaboration. Even some of the palace traditionalists began to see the potential benefits of Charlotte's approach. One particularly meaningful moment came when Charlotte visited the Children's Hospital again and was able to tell Emma about her plans. Emma, though still very ill, was thrilled to hear that Charlotte was pursuing veterinary studies. She made Charlotte promise to send her pictures and stories from Kenya. The 6 months of UK-based training flew by quickly. Charlotte divided her time between conservation work, royal duties, and intensive study. She discovered that balancing these responsibilities was more challenging than she had anticipated, but also more rewarding. Her royal platform allowed her to bring attention to conservation issues in ways that ordinary volunteers couldn't, while her hands-on work gave her the credibility to speak knowledgeably about the challenges facing wildlife. When the time came for Charlotte to leave for Kenya, the entire family gathered at the airport to see her off. There were tears from Catherine, proud smiles from William, and excited chatter from George and Louis, who had become fascinated by their sister's adventures. The 3 months in Kenya exceeded all of Charlotte's expectations. Working alongside local veterinarians and conservationists, she helped treat injured elephants, participated in rhino monitoring programs, and learned about the complex relationships between wildlife conservation and local communities. More importantly, Charlotte discovered that her royal status, when used thoughtfully, could open doors and create opportunities for conservation work that might otherwise be impossible. Her presence brought international media attention to the Kenya program, resulting in increased funding and support. Government officials who might normally ignore conservation advocates agreed to meetings when a British princess was involved. Charlotte also learned valuable lessons about the responsibilities that came with her privilege. She saw firsthand how her security requirements affected local operations and how media attention could sometimes interfere with conservation work. She began to understand the delicate balance required to use her platform effectively without overwhelming the very programs she wanted to support. The most challenging moment came when Emma, the young patient who had inspired Charlotte's journey, passed away while Charlotte was in Kenya. Charlotte was devastated and considered returning immediately to the UK. However, Emma's parents asked Charlotte to continue her work, saying that Emma would have wanted Charlotte to help as many animals as possible. Charlotte honored Emma's memory by establishing a small wildlife veterinary clinic at the Kenya Conservation Site, funded through her Royal Foundation. The clinic was named the Emma Rose Wildlife Medical Center, combining Emma's name with Charlotte's middle name. When Charlotte returned to the UK, she brought with her not just experiences and memories, but a mature understanding of what her future could look like. She had proven to herself and others that it was possible to be both an effective royal and a dedicated conservationist. The evaluation of Charlotte's trial year was overwhelmingly positive. Conservation experts praised her dedication and natural talent. Palace officials noted that her conservation work had generated more positive media coverage for the royal family than many traditional royal events. Most importantly, Charlotte had successfully maintained her royal duties while pursuing her passion. King Charles officially approved the continuation of Charlotte's program, allowing her to begin her university studies while maintaining her role as the royal family's conservation advocate. Oxford University created a special program that would allow Charlotte to combine her veterinary studies with her royal and conservation responsibilities. On Charlotte's 16th birthday, the royal family hosted a celebration that reflected her unique path. Instead of a traditional palace party, they held the event at the London Zoo, with proceeds benefiting wildlife conservation. Representatives from conservation organizations around the world attended, along with the usual royal guests. During her birthday speech, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thanked her family for their support and understanding, acknowledged the guidance she had received from conservation experts and royal advisors, and dedicated her future work to the memory of Emma and all those who had inspired her along the way. William and Catherine watched their daughter speak with pride and amazement. The serious, determined young woman before them bore little resemblance to the uncertain teenager who had first revealed her dreams just 1 year earlier. Charlotte had not only found a way to follow her passion, but had created a new model for what it meant to be a modern royal. As Charlotte concluded her speech by announcing the expansion of her conservation program to include new partnerships in Africa, Asia, and South America, William wiped away tears he hadn't expected to shed. These weren't tears of sadness or loss, but tears of pride and hope for a daughter who had found a way to honor both her heritage and her dreams. The change that no one had expected had indeed left Charlotte's parents in tears, but ultimately, These were tears of joy for a young woman who had shown that tradition and innovation could work together, that royal duty and personal passion could be united, and that sometimes the most unexpected changes lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. Charlotte's story became an inspiration not just for her own generation of royals, but for young people everywhere who struggled to balance family expectations with personal dreams. She had proven that with courage, determination, and the support of loved ones, it was possible to forge a new path while honoring the past. As the celebration continued into the evening, Charlotte stepped outside onto the zoo's terrace, looking up at the stars and thinking about all the animals around the world that still needed help. She knew that her journey was just beginning, but for the first time since receiving that Oxford acceptance letter, she felt completely at peace with her choices and excited about her future. The unexpected change had transformed not just Charlotte's life, but her entire family's understanding of what it meant to serve others in the modern world.